the thought of getting called into a meeting with the HR department fills you with a sense of dread, you're not alone. But human resources is an asset and support for the employee as well as an organization. Tiff Phillips sat down with human resource advisor Leah Saari of Reawaken Consulting to talk about the truth and misperceptions about HR.
I'm with Leah Saari, who is the owner of Reawaken Consulting. Welcome.
Hi, Tiff. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good.
I'm so glad you made it onto the podcast. Very exciting. You are HR consultant, full disclosure, but it's very good. We're so excited to have you here because you are a wealth of knowledge. So let's get into it. Tell us about your background.
So I actually have an undergrad in social psychology, which was really fun for me because I really like people. And I had a business minor because why not? Right? When 2008 happened and we had that recession, I actually went back to school and got my first master's, and then I got a second one as an MBA.
Two.
Yes, I have two. I am an avid learner. I love education of whatever kinds. So after I had finished that, I got a number of certifications, all revolving around human resources, but training and development, human capital management, things like that.
You've worked with other organizations before creating your own business. I can imagine that's a little bit terrifying. What led you to make that decision?
Yeah. So interestingly enough, I was a consultant for another company for years. And I've done this for a long time. But when COVID happened, there was that fear of what do you do if your employer shuts down? What do you do if these things aren't around? And I'm like, I have absolutely no idea. But I am a very resilient person. So I was speaking with friends and coworkers and whatnot, and they're like, you could do this yourself. And I was like, no, I don't know. And then I said, well, I could try. What harm is there? And then it exploded in a way that I was not prepared for. So it was just kind of a fluke thing that I tried.
How long did that transition take?
Not long. It was about a year and a half. And I was like, okay, well, that was fast. Mm-hmm.
What's the meaning behind the name Reawaken?
So one of the things that I wanted to do was remind people that you have to think about here and now. In our historic past in human resources and the way we run our businesses and the way we treat our people is not the same as it is today. And I had thought of a million names, but if you Google them, they're already used. And so I had to get to the point where I was like, okay, I still want to be me. And that's what I ended up with at the end was Reawaken.
So what's the significance of having a strong HR department or advisor with your organization?
So human resources is challenging. It changes all the time. The legislation, the way people behave, expectations in the workplace, and being able to stay abreast of that and run a business at the same time is easier said than done. If you have internal HR, because you're blessed enough to have a staff of the size where you can support it, because remember, we're just a cost center, then, having a strong group with you can really help mold the direction that your company is going into. It can help mold how you retain your staff, what kind of staff you bring in, if you're going to stay current and be able to move forward. Because we can have the best ideas in the world. If you have no one to execute them, then what are you going to do? Now, if you can't do that, having an external consultant that can give you the guidance along the way is just as valuable. And that's usually the kind of clients that I end up with. Some have internal HR departments, but most are just looking for the guidance so they can do it themselves.
Mm-hmm. So you do work with organizations that already have existing HR departments.
Oh, yes.
Oh, wow, that's great. That's actually a nice extra step of them. That's really conscientious.
It's really fun, too, because that's when you get to do the really creative stuff, the really high level, how do I get this started? We have our foundation, but we want to do more. So how do we get there?
Right.
Because trying to do your job, internal HR, and come up with those things and design and develop them, not that easy. We only have so many hours in the day. So that's the really fun stuff.
So my question is, nobody likes to get a call down that you got to go down to the HR department. They need to talk to you. That's terrifying. How do you kind of dispel that stigma?
So that is actually a stigma that's been along for a long time. What I try to explain to people, and it's easier when they don't have in-house HR, is that that's the manager's role, is to give the hard messages, because the manager is the one that has the relationship with the person. So that shouldn't come to HR. It does, because we are professionals with different types of language, plus we're unbiased. These people don't report to us.
Right.
And so it's a lot easier to have conversations with people when you don't have a performance issue in your mind. Right?
Right.
So when I'm speaking with people and when I'm sitting with managers, because I won't let them have me talk to them without the manager present, then it just gives them another voice or support so that they're not one-on-one with the employee. So the goal is immediately set the employee at ease, and then let's have a real conversation. And it has to be both ways. Please don't ever talk at people.
Right. So in a way, you're kind of an advocate for both the employee and the employer.
Absolutely.
That's a great role to be in.
You can't be one without the other.
Yeah.
You just can't.
There are a lot of generations now working in the workplace. So you have Gen X, you have Gen Z, you have millennials working along with, the boomer generation. How do you kind of span that gap? Like, how do you bring people together to work? Because everyone's got a little different working style.
Right. And crazy enough, it's not just generational, it's individual too.
Fair.
Because there are people that are millennials that have very much boomer thought processes. It's how you're raised, what environments you've worked in, all of those things. Spanning that gap is more about understanding individuals than it is about understanding generations. When we talk in generations, we're speaking in generalities and biases.
Right.
You cut down to the people and you can fix that.
So technology is moving at the speed of light. We have a lot of things coming our way, especially artificial intelligence.
Yes.
So my question is how is HR being impacted by AI?
It's actually in a really beneficial way.
Really?
Because there are things that are really task-oriented that I just don't feel are a good use of anyone's time. And if you can automate tasks, and if you can automate systematic things that don't involve talking to people, then you're going to save a lot of time and energy. Anyone would. And so if you're able to focus on that interaction and what that leads to, let the AI do the technology part. But why would I sit there and type into a keyboard when someone else will do it for me? And they're smarter than I am.
Yeah. Now, have you had any issues with it being in the workplace? Are people using AI to kind of get around doing the work, so to speak?
Sometimes,
Yeah.
but you also have to understand it enough in order to do that. So in the same respect, I actually have a lot of respect for them for figuring that out.
True.
But they have to go back and check the work because AI learns. It's not perfect from the get-go.
Right.
So if they're not going back and putting in the effort to make sure it's working right, then they didn't really get around anything.
Yeah.
So do you know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. So what are some missteps that an organization or business has in communicating with its employees?
Not.
Oh, fair. Fair.
Not. I think transparency is something that people put in a different light than they need to. So when we're talking about our organization, there's certain things that owners and executives don't want to share with employees, but they forget about the parts that they can.
Right.
I'm not saying open your checkbook to people and say, this is what we have, this is what we don't have. But don't lead people in the dark so they don't know where they're going. And after COVID should have taught us all that.
Yeah.
Because if people don't know where they stand and they don't understand how they're contributing, then they're going to lose interest and go find some place that can.
Right.
So you have to have open lines of communication. And that doesn't mean, say, make an appointment with me and I'll speak to you at this hour, at this day, and that's the only way they can get in touch with you, because no one's going to make that effort anymore. They want to know that they can just reach out and get an answer. Sometimes things like Slack or whatnot make that a lot easier to people. But we also have to know when it's okay to do something via text or email and when you really have to have that conversation, either on the phone or in person. There are certain things you just can't do with technology, like hear tone.
Right. Fair. That's a big problem with communication. I get an email sometimes. I'm like, I don't know how to read this.
Exactly. I'm like, I think I just took that really personally.
Right. You don't know the intent behind it. Do you find that workplaces are now treating their employees as the whole person rather than just kind of the thing or person that does the work?
The good ones are.
Yeah.
No, I do see that. That's much more progressive, and companies that understand that you have to really look at the whole picture are much more successful today. It is tough. It is tough to see the whole thing because you have to know more about your staff than we've ever known before. And some people are uncomfortable with sharing that information as well. And then we make assumptions because we're like, okay, well, we want to protect someone's well-being, but we only know how we protect our own. And if they've not asked us for anything, then we're just going to assume what works for us works for them because we don't want to not give people what they need. That communication has to happen both ways, and you'd be surprised how often the employees don't come forward.
I mean, a lot of people are probably scared too, for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I will say employees got to remember to give someone a chance before they shut down. And sometimes past experiences stop us from doing that. But just ask. It doesn't hurt to ask.
Right.
You know?
Speaking of asking, so what kind of questions should a person ask during an interview to make sure that job is specific and right for them?
So I'm going to give you 3 really big tips here. The first thing is you need to know before you start your interview what their pay range is. And you need to decide if that's something that you are interested in, because I can promise you they're not going to fluctuate from that. They can't ask you what you make now, which is appropriate, but you need to know what your standard is, because otherwise you're wasting everyone's time. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's the number one thing. The number 2 thing is you need to understand what the job description really is. When people are posting jobs, they give you an overview or whatnot. I usually tell people, ask for the full job description before your interview so you can review the things that you're going to be responsible for and then ask intelligent questions about either what does that mean? What does that entail? Is that a group of people I'm working with? Or am I solely responsible? And then you really need to know if you're going to manage people. Sometimes you're not told how many or how few people are on your team, and if you are the manager of that team or not the manager. And that makes a lot of difference also. I have friends that are extremely professional, intelligent men and women, but they said, I will never manage a person. Ever. And I'm like, okay, but you're a VP. And they're like, no, I have directors for that.
Oh.
And I was like, okay. Fair.
It's one way to do it.
But those 3 things are the most vital to understanding if you want the role or not, because the risk is just as high for the candidate as it is for the employer. So when the employer's interviewing, they already know what they want. You have to know what you want too.
Fair. You got to advocate for yourself.
Absolutely. And now's the time.
Yeah. There are a lot of industries right now that are battling high turnover rates. How do they combat that?
Get creative.
Yeah.
Get creative and ask. Ask your staff, what are you missing? What do we do well? What could we do better? And then really focus on what that means for the business. Some things, unfortunately, can't be changed.
Right.
There are certain aspects of businesses you can't get around, and that's either a federal requirement or just part of the job itself that's never going to be able to be adjusted. But then there are other things that nobody can come up with. Or you wouldn't know unless you ask the question. So you have to stay in front of it. The other is you really have to pay attention to your market, because if you're seeing jobs posted, let's say, for similar roles, and they're offering all these things that you are not, you need to really rethink that. And when I say get creative, the other piece is stop saying no before you hear the whole question. Most people, when they have a question, they'll give you the solution. You just have to ask, what do you think it should be?
All right, I'm going to think about that. Yeah. So what's the best part of your job? What makes you get up in the morning being like, I love what I do. I can't wait to go to work?
It's a really basic answer. I love being able to walk away from a meeting, an interaction, a client, a project, knowing that I gave them something they didn't have before. I gave them knowledge that they then can use. Whether they ever call me again or not because I gave them exactly what they needed, I'm good as long as I can feel like that person felt educated. They felt like what they did served their own purpose. Some might not do it. And that's okay, as long as I know that they got what they asked for.
Yeah. So in your way, you're just making your little difference in the world. I love it.
I'm making my little tiny difference.
I love it. Well, I guess we'll leave it at that. Thank you so much, Leah, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Hey friend, thanks for stopping by. If you like this video by The Local Scene, share the love and give it a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe.